The glass of wine shattered before it even hit the floor. Amina barely had time to react before a man at table 7 slammed his hand down again, laughing too loudly for a place that demanded silence. "Is this really the level of service you people call luxury?" he scoffed, pointing at her tray. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Amina stood still, not frozen, controlled. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray, but her face remained calm, unreadable. The restaurant's crystal chandeliers glowed softly above them, reflecting off polished marble floors, but none of it softened the tension. At the far end of the dining hall, a man in a black, tailored suit slowly lifted his gaze. Kang Dae-hyun, the Mafia lord. The kind of man people lowered their voices around without knowing why. He didn't intervene. He didn't need to. Tonight was different, though. He had been sitting in this restaurant for exactly 43 minutes, and he had spent most of them watching his brother eat. Not because he was hungry, because it had been 3 years since he allowed himself to sit in a public space with Minjun. 3 years of controlled environments, private rooms, screen guests. Tonight was a test, Dae-hyun's own private experiment in whether the world could still hold his brother without breaking him. It was not going well. Minjun had been fine before the laughter started. Now Dae-hyun watched the familiar signs. The shoulders rising, the fork going still, the soft pulling inward that meant his brother was beginning to disappear inside himself. That was what Dae-hyun feared most, not chaos, not danger. The disappearing. Amina bent slightly, picking up the broken glass without a word. Another customer whispered something mocking in Korean. Laughter followed. Then, a chair scraped loudly. Not from Amina, from the private section at the center table. A young man stood up abruptly. He wore an expensive outfit that looked almost childish. Soft pastel hoodie, loose cardigan with embroidered animals, sneakers too clean to belong in a place like this. But what made the room freeze wasn't his clothing. It was the way he trembled. Minjun, Dae-hyun's younger brother, the one no one was supposed to disturb, the one who rarely spoke. He pointed directly at the laughing men. His voice cracked, but carried through the room anyway. "Stop!" Silence spread instantly. Even the servers stopped moving. Minjun's breathing became uneven. His hands shook as he turned slowly, locking eyes with Amina. Something changed in his expression. Recognition, then relief. "You?" he whispered. Amina stepped forward instinctively. "Minjun, it's okay. Sit down." But he shook his head violently. The laughter was gone now, replaced with confusion and unease. And then it happened. He turned sharply toward the table that had mocked her. His voice rose, higher, more broken. "Don't mock her again." The entire restaurant went dead silent. Even Dae-hyun's expression shifted slightly. Minjun's eyes filled with panic, like a child afraid something precious would be taken away. "She's my only friend." The words hit harder than any threat. A few guests stood up awkwardly. The manager rushed in from behind the counter. "Sir, please." But Dae-hyun raised his hand slightly, and the room obeyed. Minjun was still trembling, staring at Amina like she was the only stable thing in the world. Amina didn't move, didn't speak, but something in her eyes softened. Just for a second. Then Dae-hyun finally stood, slow, controlled, dangerous. His gaze moved from his brother to Amina and stayed there, long enough for everyone to feel it. Not anger, not confusion, something worse. Interest. The manager tried to laugh nervously. "She's just a waitress, sir. We can remove her if—" "Don't!" Minjun interrupted suddenly, grabbing Amina's sleeve. The room froze again. Even Dae-hyun turned slightly toward his brother. Minjun's grip tightened like a child afraid of losing a toy. "Don't take her," he whispered. Amina looked down at his hand, then back at Dae-hyun, and for the first time, Dae-hyun noticed her properly. Not as staff, not as background, as something interrupting his control. He didn't speak, just stared. Then finally, in a voice low enough to cut through the silence, let her finish her shift. It wasn't kindness, it was decision. And that was worse, because decisions from men like him were never random. Amina gently placed her hand over Minjun's. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Minjun relaxed slightly, but Dae-hyun's eyes narrowed, because he noticed something else. His brother had never relaxed for anyone before, not even family, not even him. The room slowly returned to movement, but the energy had changed. Guests whispered, staff avoided eye contact, and Amina continued serving, but now she could feel it. She was being watched, not once, constantly, especially by him. Kang Dae-hyun, the man who didn't look away. And as the night continued, Minjun refused to eat unless Amina brought the food herself. That was the first crack, the first imbalance. Later, when Minjun finally fell asleep in his chair, chin tucked, hands folded exactly like he used to do as a child, Dae-hyun did not move from his seat. He watched his brother sleep for a moment. Something passed across his face that he would never allow in daylight. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked deliberately toward Amina. She was arranging glassware near the side station when he stopped beside her. "You touched his hand," he said. Amina continued working. He was distressed. "You're not his caretaker." "No," she agreed. "But I was standing right there." A pause. "You didn't ask permission," he said. Amina turned slightly to face him. And this was the first moment she genuinely challenged him. Not accidentally, not defensively, deliberately. "Do I need permission to be kind?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it landed in the space between them like something thrown. Dae-hyun held her gaze. "In my world," he said evenly, "yes." Amina met his eyes without flinching. "Then your world is the problem," she said, not loudly, not with heat, just stated, the way someone states the weather. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. Then Dae-hyun looked at her in a way he had not looked at anyone in years. Not as a threat to manage, as a person who refused to be managed. He didn't respond. He turned and walked back to his brother, but his jaw was tight, and his hands, for the first time that evening, were not perfectly still. If you're following this story, drop a like and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. This is only getting more complicated. The next night, the restaurant was quieter than usual, but the silence felt heavier, not calmer. Amina noticed it immediately. Minjun was already seated at the center table, swinging his legs slightly under the chair, like a child waiting for food. He wore the same soft, oversized cardigan, this time with a small plush keychain clipped to his bag. The maid who usually accompanied him stood behind him nervously, but she didn't need to speak. Minjun wasn't paying attention to her anymore. His eyes were fixed on the entrance, waiting. And when Amina stepped in with the first tray, his face lit up instantly. "There," he said, pointing, like she was something he had been searching for. Amina gave a small nod, professional as always. "Good evening, Minjun." He smiled widely, too openly, too pure for a place like this. But across the table, the atmosphere shifted. Kang Dae-hyun was already there. Same seat, same posture, same unreadable expression. Only his eyes moved, from his brother to Amina, and back again. He had not missed a single detail. Not the smile, not the way Minjun leaned forward, not the way Amina adjusted her tone slightly softer than she did for others. Something about it irritated him, not loud enough to show, but deep enough to linger. The accident had happened 3 years ago. A car explosion meant for Dae-hyun. Minjun had been in the wrong vehicle at the wrong time. They said he survived because the blast didn't fully hit his side. But survival wasn't the same as recovery. He woke up after weeks in a hospital bed with parts of his memory gone. Emotions unstable, behavior regressed. Doctors used polite language. Cognitive impairment, emotional regression. But Dae-hyun knew the truth. His brother was not the same person anymore. He liked bright things now, soft voices, simple questions, and people who didn't look at him like he was broken. That was the part that changed everything. Because everyone did, except her. Minjun tapped the table impatiently. "She comes now," he said, almost scolding the empty space where Amina wasn't standing yet. Amina placed the dish down gently. "It's already here." He nodded happily, then began eating, but distracted, stopping mid-bite to watch her the way a child watches a butterfly, half afraid it will leave. Then suddenly he pushed his plate forward. "I don't like this one," he said. The maid immediately stepped forward. "I'll replace it, young master." "No," he cut in quickly, grabbing Amina's sleeve. "I want her." Daehyun's fingers tightened slightly around his glass. Amina crouched beside Minjun. "Tell me what you don't like." He frowned seriously, thinking too hard for too long. Then he said, "It's too angry." Amina blinked. "Angry?" He nodded vigorously. "The taste. It's angry. I don't want angry food." A faint silence spread through the table. Daehyun exhaled slowly through his nose. It was the first time he almost smiled. Almost. Amina turned to the maid. "Can I see the kitchen version of the sauce?" The maid looked at Daehyun. He gave a small nod. As Amina moved away, Minjun called after her. "You come back?" "I always come back," she said without turning. Daehyun watched that exchange with the focus of a man cataloging a risk he couldn't yet name. When she returned, she crouched beside Minjun again and let him smell both versions of the sauce before choosing. He pointed immediately at the milder one, triumphant. "That one is not angry," he announced. Amina smiled. "Good choice." The warmth in her voice was involuntary. Daehyun saw it. And somehow that was the thing that unsettled him most. Not strategy, not performance, just warmth. His brother hadn't received that from anyone since the accident. Not genuinely. Everyone was cautious around Minjun. Careful, like they were afraid something inside him might shatter if they smiled too naturally. She didn't do that. She just smiled. Daehyun's voice cut in coldly. "Don't promise things you can't control." Amina straightened slowly. Their eyes met fully. Not guest and worker, not service and customer, something sharper. "I don't promise things," she replied calmly. "I said I come back. That's a statement, not a promise." Daehyun studied her. "The difference?" "A promise implies I need your permission," she said. "A statement just describes what I do." Silence. Another direct challenge. Quiet, precise, infuriatingly accurate. Minjun suddenly reached for her hand again. "Stay," he said simply. Amina smiled at him. Daehyun's gaze darkened slightly, because he was beginning to realize something uncomfortable. He wanted her to look at him the way she looked at his brother. Not with pity, not with caution, just without walls. That realization arrived unwanted, and he buried it immediately. Comment below. Are you rooting for Amina and Daehyun yet? Or does he have too much to fix first? Let me know, and don't forget to subscribe. Later that night, after the restaurant emptied, Daehyun stayed behind. Amina was cleaning the last table when she felt it. Presence. Heavy. Still. She didn't turn immediately. "You're influencing him," Daehyun said. Amina continued wiping. "I'm serving him." "That's not what I asked." She stopped, turned slightly. "Then ask better questions." He stepped closer. Up close, he was more intimidating than across a room. Not because of size, but because of certainty. Everything about him felt controlled, even his anger. "You don't belong here," he said. Amina met his gaze evenly. "Neither does your brother." That was the first crack. It wasn't loud, but it hit. Daehyun's jaw tightened. Amina lowered her voice slightly. "But I didn't make him feel like he doesn't belong anywhere." He didn't respond. She continued, voice careful now. "He sat in there tonight and ate a full meal. He looked at the room and didn't panic. Do you know how long it's been since he did that?" Daehyun went very still. "You don't know how long," she said. "But I do, because he told me." "He told you?" Daehyun repeated. Amina nodded. "He said the last time he ate in a room full of people without wanting to leave was a birthday dinner. 3 years ago." She paused. "He said his brother was there." The silence that followed was different. Daehyun looked at her as if she had just handed him something he had lost and stopped searching for. "I wasn't there tonight because of you," he said quietly. "I was there because of him." Amina nodded gently. "I know." He's been asking to come back here for 2 weeks. Another pause. I said yes because I thought it was the restaurant. His voice was quieter now. Not soft, just quieter. I didn't know it was you. Amina didn't fill the silence. She simply stood in it with him. And that, the absence of performance, was what made Dae-hyun stay another full minute without speaking. Then Minjun's voice suddenly echoed from behind them. Are you fighting? Both turned. He was standing there in his soft cardigan, rubbing his eyes sleepily. Amina immediately softened. No, just talking. Minjun nodded slowly, then walked directly to Amina and hugged her waist without warning. I don't like when people are loud with you, he muttered. Behind him, Dae-hyun saw everything, and for the first time since the accident, something inside him shifted. Not anger, not control, recognition of loss, because his brother had once hugged him like that. Before the crash, before silence replaced him, and now, that version of his brother belonged to someone else's presence. Dae-hyun turned away first, not because he lost control, but because he almost did. The night Dae-hyun came back with a question instead of control was the night everything changed texture. He sat as always, waited as always. But when Amina approached, he looked at her not with evaluation in his eyes, but with something quieter. What would you do, he asked, if I told you to stop working here? Amina didn't hesitate. I would leave. Just like that? Yes. No argument? No. A pause. No resistance. Amina looked at him calmly. Why would I resist something I can leave? Dae-hyun studied her. Because leaving means not seeing him, he said. Amina was quiet. And not seeing him, he continued, would hurt him. You know that, which means you already know leaving isn't simple. Amina set a glass down. You're trying to find a lever. He didn't deny it. Is that what you do? She asked. Find what people care about and hold it? Yes, he said simply. And what do you do when someone doesn't have anything to hold? She asked. A beat. I've never met anyone like that, he replied. Amina tilted her head. Maybe you've been looking at the wrong things. He held her gaze, then quietly. What should I be looking at? The question was not rhetorical, and she knew it. Amina sat down across from him, against all protocol, against all expectation. And Dae-hyun didn't stop her. She folded her hands on the table. Your brother, she said, doesn't need a lever. He doesn't need control. He needs someone who treats his feelings like they're logical. Dae-hyun listened. When he says the food is angry, he's right. The chef is having a bad night, and it comes through in how he seasons. When Minjun says the room feels too loud even when it's quiet, he's right. The energy in a room changes. He just feels it before other people notice. She paused. He's not broken. He's just more sensitive to truth than the rest of us have allowed ourselves to be. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Dae-hyun looked at her as if she had just described his brother in a language he never had access to. I thought, he said finally, that protecting him meant removing risk. Amina nodded. I know, but sometimes what feels like protection from the outside feels like a cage from the inside. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. Did he say that? He asked quietly. Amina hesitated only slightly. He said he misses when his brother used to sit with him and just be quiet, not watching for signs, just quiet. Dae-hyun exhaled, and in that exhale was 3 years of maintained control cracking along its edges. He looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Up close in the warm restaurant light, without the armor of pure authority, he looked younger than she expected. Not soft, but human. I don't know how to be with him without watching, he admitted. I know, Amina said. But you could learn. The air between them was different now. Not professional, not adversarial. Real. Dae-hyun turned slightly toward her, and in the angle of movement the distance between them closed without either of them having planned it. She could see the faint exhaustion around his eyes. The kind that lives in people who have been the only one responsible for something fragile for too long. He looked at her mouth, just for a second, and then back at her eyes. Amina didn't move. She didn't lean in, but she didn't move away either. They stayed there in that nearness, for 3 full seconds of complete stillness. Then Dae-hyun leaned back, slow, deliberate, like a man deciding something rather than retreating. "You're dangerous," he said quietly. Not a threat, almost a confession. "Because I'm honest?" she asked. "Because you make me want to be." Subscribe. I promise you, episode 2 is not going to be quiet. The night Minjun came back with the drawing was the night something settled. He ran in slightly unsteady, holding the folded paper tight, the maid and escort waiting outside. "Amina," he called instantly. She was still there with Dae-hyun when he arrived, both of them standing close enough that Minjun slowed slightly as he reached them, eyes moving between them. Then he smiled, like something he had hoped for had happened while he wasn't looking. "You're standing together," he said, pleased. Dae-hyun opened his mouth. Minjun was already unfolding the drawing. "I made this." Amina knelt. "What is it?" 3 figures, one tall man in black, one small figure in soft clothes, and one woman standing between them, holding both their hands. "I drew us," he said, then pointing carefully, "That's you." To Dae-hyun, "That's him," then himself, "And that's me." Amina went still. Dae-hyun stared at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at Amina. Not the waitress, not the outsider, a person. "He only draws things he believes are real," he said quietly. Amina looked at the drawing, then softly, "Then maybe he's not wrong." Minjun looked between them again. His expression was clear, open, hopeful, the way only people who have stopped pretending can be. "Can we eat together?" he asked. Dae-hyun turned to him. "Now?" "Yes," Minjun said firmly. "All 3, like the drawing." Dae-hyun glanced at Amina. She looked back at him with the same steadiness she always carried. Not pushing, not pulling, just present. He pulled out a chair for his brother. Then, after a pause, he pulled out a chair for her too. It was a small thing, but from him, it was enormous. Amina sat. Minjun immediately launched into a story about a bird he had watched from his window all morning, describing its color in such specific detail that both of them ended up listening without pretense. Dae-hyun watched his brother talk, really talk, animated and bright, and something in his chest loosened in a way that was almost painful. At one point, Minjun reached out and placed one hand on Amina's arm and one hand on Dae-hyun's. "Good," he said seriously, like it was a verdict. Amina looked at Dae-hyun over his brother's head. Dae-hyun looked back at her, and for the first time, there was nothing calculated in the look, only something quiet, something that had been building for weeks in silence, unspoken, but shared. Later, when Minjun had eaten everything on his plate and fallen into a contented drowsiness in his chair, Dae-hyun walked Amina to the side entrance. They stood outside in the night air for a moment. He spoke first. "I want to try something." "What?" she asked. "Being in that room with him, not watching for problems." He paused. "Just being there." Amina nodded slowly. "That's the right direction." "And I'll need—" He stopped. She looked at him. "I'll need you to tell me when I'm doing it wrong," he said. She considered that. "You want feedback from a waitress. I want feedback from someone who sees him clearly." A beat. "And you'll listen?" she asked him. "I will try." Amina almost smiled. "Okay." He turned slightly, and in the dark the city lights caught the angles of his face, sharper in some places, softer in others than she had realized before. "You pushed back against me from the first night," he said. "You weren't afraid." "I was aware," she corrected gently. "There's a difference." "I know," he said. "I understand the difference now." A pause. He looked at her directly. "I don't want you to stop." She held his gaze. Not as subordinate, not as challenge, as equal. "Then don't give me reason to," she said. A quiet laugh almost happened in his expression. It didn't fully form, but it was there. Close. Like so many things between them. Close. He nodded once. She turned to leave. "Amina." She looked back. He was standing very still in the light. "He said tonight was his favorite night since the accident," Dae-hyun said quietly. She didn't respond immediately. Then, "You were there." He blinked slightly. That's why, she said. Not because of me, because of you. She walked into the night, and Dae-hyun stood there long after the sound of her footsteps had gone. Not planning, not calculating, just standing in something new. Something that felt, unexpectedly, like the beginning of healing. Not only for his brother, for himself. Minjun appeared at the doorway, yawning, cardigan slipping off one shoulder. She's coming back tomorrow, he said confidently. Dae-hyun looked at him. Yes, he said simply. Minjun smiled. Then, quieter, trusting as a child and as honest as only he could be, he leaned against his brother's arm. And Dae-hyun, for the first time in 3 years, let him. Didn't stiffen, didn't manage, just stayed. The city moved around them, lights and distant traffic and the hum of a world that didn't stop for grief or healing. But in that doorway, something started that was small and real and worth protecting. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. If this story moved you at all, please subscribe and hit the like button, and drop a comment below. What do you think Dae-hyun's next move should be? Because episode 2 has a rival, a secret, and a moment that will break this open entirely.